the signal arrived like an electric, almost imperceptible whisper in the early hours of May 14, 2029, at the Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia. Technicians detected regular narrow-band pulses coming from the area of the sky where the trajectory of 2029 X was projected. These weren't satellite interferences or terrestrial radar echoes. The pattern repeated every 7 minutes exactly, with modulations that seemed to follow an internal structure. In closed astrophysics forums, some compared it to a coded language, others to an unknown calibration system. In public statements, the event was summarized as background noise of undetermined origin, far from the laboratories. In a Victorian mansion in London's Belgravia district, Alexander de Rossi-Contarin studied private copies of the Codex Examna, obtained at outrageous prices. A direct descendant of the ancient Venetian black nobility, his lineage claimed roots stretching back to the patricians of imperial Rome. For centuries, the original Latin surname, de Rossi-Contarinus, had discreetly mutated to adapt to each center of power where they settled. From Venice to Amsterdam, from Amsterdam to London. To the world, Alexander was a magnate with global investments and a network of contacts that spanned from the City of London to the halls of power in Brussels and Washington. In his private circle, he was something more, the heir to a family legacy whose declared objective for generations was to control ultimate power. The Codex Examna was, for him, a roadmap. In the margins of a facsimile, he noted with his fountain pen, orbital control equals world control. The time is near. The inheritance will be fulfilled. On the group's weekly video call, Sophia was the first to mention the radio emissions. They aren't random, she asserted. There's a fractal symmetry in the intervals, as if they're measuring something. Or communicating. Communicating with whom? Jake asked. I don't know, but it's not noise. Ignacio, the Jesuit, clasped his hands. In the Codex, the celestial messenger said the second moon awaits the signal to awaken. Perhaps that's what we're hearing. Victor let out a dry laugh. Or maybe it's the countdown to something we won't want to see. None of them said it out loud, but they all felt the pieces of the puzzle fitting together more and more. Miles away, Alexander de Rossi-Contarin, oblivious to their research but obsessed with the same goal, was already planning how to take possession of that ship, not understanding that its power could not be seized, and that the enemy it was built to defend against would make no distinction between kings and pawns. Chapter 8. The invisible hand's Saturn's orbit was quiet that week, or so it seemed to the public. On the internal screens of the Kepler-2 Space Observatory, an astronomical surveillance satellite operated by an international consortium, technicians watched as 2020 Nix performed another subtle maneuver, a change in orbital inclination of just 0.03 degrees, enough to minimize its exposure to the observation lines of several telescopes. No asteroid could do that on its own. However, these images would never reach the scientific community. An internal protocol sealed the data under the category sensitivity level 5. The consortium never knew that behind that classification was a direct order channeled through a British foundation controlled by Alexander de Rossi-Contarin. In just 3 months, he had secured indirect control over 3 orbital telescopes through contracts managed by shell companies, privileged access to restricted Vatican archives, and the right to consult documents in the General Archive of the Indies in Seville. But to open certain doors, influence wasn't enough. Obstacles had to be eliminated. Father Lorenzo Benedetti, deputy prefect of the Vatican Apostolic Library, was found dead in his apartment, officially from a massive heart attack. Days earlier, he had told a colleague that a Brit had offered him an exorbitant sum to expedite a consultation permit for Mesoamerican manuscripts. Less than 2 weeks later, Sister Margaret Doyle, chief archivist of the Vatican's Rare Manuscripts section, fell down a stone staircase in a private wing of the complex. The official report cited a fortuitous accident, but the security cameras had been disconnected for 3 days due to a technical malfunction. Both had held, until their deaths, physical keys and access codes to vaults Alexander needed to reach. A few days later, those keys were in his possession. The most delicate part was controlling the public narrative. Alexander couldn't prevent certain astronomical data from leaking, but he could neutralize its impact. To do this, he discreetly funded a group of media-savvy scientists, familiar faces on television and at conferences, who assured the public that 2029X was merely an orbital curiosity of no relevance. Their charisma and reputation were enough to turn any suspicion into a viral joke. Privately, Alexander studied every new report on the object's trajectory. He knew it wasn't natural. He knew it was getting closer. And he was convinced he could seize it when it reached Earth's orbit. On the group's video call, Sophia mentioned that some telescopes seemed to have stopped tracking 2029X at key moments. "It's strange," she commented, as if someone decided to look away just when it gets most interesting. Ignacio frowned. In history, whenever what we can see or remember is hidden, it's because someone fears what might be known. Victor nodded slowly, or because someone wants to claim it before anyone else does. Millions of miles away, in the cold frontier of Saturn. 2029X continued its journey, doing the impossible to avoid being watched too closely. While on Earth, someone already believed it was destined to be his. Chapter 9, The Merciless Guardian. The object 2029X emerged from Saturn's shadow cone like a silent leviathan. In the observatories still tracking it, the data was clear. It had reduced its relative speed to the Sun and executed a turn that placed it on a direct trajectory toward Jupiter's orbit. The maneuver was not only impossible for an inert body, it was too precise to be coincidental. The radio emissions began to intensify. Now, the pulses were not simple repetitive sequences. There were bursts of high frequency followed by mathematically perfect silences, like phrases of an unknown language. In Rome, under the vault of the Vatican Apostolic Library, Alexander de Rossi-Contarin examined the prize he had pursued for years, a 16th century manuscript written by Friar Bartolomé de Mina. In it, the friar transcribed what the celestial messenger had allegedly revealed to the ancestors of the Maya. It does not obey the men of this earth. It was made by other hands to guard the seed and the house of its creators. And if the life it finds is not its own, it will tear it out as the wind tears the leaf. Alexander read and reread that sentence, but his interpretation was twisted. To him, it didn't mean a threat. It meant the machine was designed to obey a legitimate master. If he could pose as that master, he could turn the ship into his ultimate weapon. On the video call, Sophia and Youssef reviewed the new trajectory graphs. "Look at this," Sophia said. "It's as if it's waiting at Jupiter." "Or charging energy," Victor added. "In the Navy, we had drones that did something similar. They de-hold a fixed point until receiving the order to enter an attack zone." Ignacio, his face serious, intervened. "In the Codex, the messenger didn't speak of protecting us, but of protecting something else, ... something that isn't us." Jake raised an eyebrow. "So, if this thing arrives and decides we don't fit in, ... there will be no negotiation," Ignacio stated. "The intelligence that governs it was made to fulfill its mission, not to dialogue." In London, Alexander closed the manuscript. For him, Jupiter wasn't a waiting point. It was an opportunity. He didn't see an implacable AI alien to humanity, ... He saw a tool. But the approaching machine did not distinguish between beggars and emperors. If Earth did not meet the conditions for its creator's life, everyone, including Alexander de Rossi-Contarin, would be erased without a second thought. Chapter 10: The Piece That Moves Ahead. Alexander de Rossi-Contarin's plan moved with the precision of a master watchmaker. Through a network of shell companies, he discreetly chartered 2 large private space freighters. Officially, they were to transport modules for a future mining station. In reality, their holds carried assault drones, interception satellites, and an autonomous lab. The orbital itineraries were carefully calculated to coincide with the transit of 2020 Nix as it entered Jupiter's gravitational sphere of influence. His goal: to approach before any state agency and claim the ship. In Washington, D.C., Vice President David H. Kellerman reviewed a confidential report. A Space Force colonel had leaked a memo about unauthorized private activity in a strategic interest zone. On the last page, a name, a de Rossi-Contarin. Kellerman knew who he was. He requested an urgent meeting with the president. "Sir, a private individual is preparing to intercept 2020 Nix. I don't think it's just an asteroid." The president, tired and busy, dismissed his concerns. "David, the scientists say it's a big rock. Let's not start an international incident over a millionaire's whim." The meeting ended with a cold handshake and an order to leave it to NASA. That same night, Kellerman acted on his own, using a discreet diplomatic channel. He located Sofia Morales and asked to speak with her about a matter that cannot be discussed over the phone. Sophia, wary at first, agreed to include him in the next video call with the group. Kellerman listened silently as they reviewed the orbital anomalies and archaeological coincidences. When the meeting ended, Kellerman knew two things: that Rossi-Contarin was not after a simple scientific prize, and that the administration would not act unless he found undeniable proof. In the outer orbit near Jupiter, 2029X continued its imperturbable course, perhaps unaware that several factions on Earth were preparing to claim understand ... or destroy it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow and subscribe for more.